Okay, my confession to you is those little blurbs on the cover of the book, they work on me. Like, if I see a good blurb from someone I like, I am going to buy the book. But today on the podcast, turns out blurbs are a cause of a lot of drama. You'll hear why some go as far as calling them a plague on the publishing industry. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, listen, we are in the swing of things when it comes to like book festival season. I should mention I'm the guest curator for the Vancouver Writers Festival. So if you're in BC in October, please come hang out. It's going to be a great time. But what I want to get into today is the politics of the blurb. You've seen blurbs before. They're the little endorsements from well-known authors on the cover of a book. But what you don't see is all the work that goes into trying to actually get a blurb. There's a recent piece in Esquire that called them a plague on the industry. This morning, we're going to get into it with two authors who know what it's like to blurb and be blurbed. Jen Sookfong Lee and Anakana Schofield. Welcome back to Commotion. What's up, everybody?
Hey, how's it going?
I appreciate how early it is for you guys in British Columbia. I appreciate you being here. Anakana, I'm going to start with you. When you hear the word blurb, what feelings bubble up for you?
Well, I have been eternally grateful to receive them, and God bless anybody that ever said a kind word about me or anything I wrote. And a curse upon those that said rude things. And it has literally taken years off my life writing them. When I get asked to write one, it's something akin to anaphylaxis. I obviously I'm from Ireland originally, and I grew up a Catholic, so I'm just plagued with guilt. You want to say yes, but there was a time when I would get a request every 34 minutes. And then I think then people figured out that my name on their book would be the death knell of it. So fortunately that calmed down. And then I just concluded that I just couldn't write them. I was just no good at writing them.
Jen, do you have similarly strong feelings about being asked to blurb? What happens to you when the word blurb comes up?
I actually really love blurbs, the blurbing process. I love saying no to blurbs if I don't have time. It's okay. I have no problem with that. But here's the thing. When people ask me, I feel like it's my duty to be honest about whether I have the time, whether I can do it, and I can say no. And I always say I'm happy to see your book and read it and enjoy it, but I don't have time to do this by your deadline or whatever. As an editor, when I'm asking other people for blurbs, I have zero shame. I don't care. I will ask the most famous writer you've ever heard of for a blurb, and I don't care, because what's the worst thing that's going to happen? They're going to tell me they don't have time, or they'll ignore me. They'll ghost me. That's fine too. I've been ghosted by so many famous authors. It's not even funny.
But can I ask you this? Jen, you're an author, but you're also an editor, as you just mentioned. Why do they matter? Why do blurbs matter so much in the industry?
I don't think blurbs, for example, don't matter to your average reader. I don't think very much the person who's going to pick it up at a bookstore and look at the cover. I think where it matters to the bookseller, the person at the bookstore who thinks, how is this book going to sell? I think it matters to festival organizers or people who are organizing events, because when they look at who has blurbed a book, they're going to know who this author is either friends with or has contact with, or what kind of community they belong to. And then they're going to know who's going to come to this event, who else can we get to read at this event. So all of that, I think, is where blurbs are important.
So right off the top, I admitted to being someone for whom blurbs totally work for. In that Esquire piece, the journalist Sophie Vershbau begins with a really clear example. A relatively unknown author asks her to read her new book, and what persuades her to crack the cover is that an author that she loves and trusts gives it a blurb. And the blurb was this. It's, quote, a classic Southern Gothic tale told through the prism of modern-day sensibilities, not to be missed. That's a blurb that worked on her. Has a blurb ever worked for you, Jen? Have you ever looked at a blurb and been like, that's enough to sell me on this thing, I'm going to get into it?
Yeah, it has. It definitely has. There have been blurbs it usually works for me for debut authors. If I think about, I read for a living and I don't have a lot of leisure reading time.
Yeah.
If I look and see that somebody I really love, I don't know, Savan Kamtama Vogza, let's just say, blurbs a book by a debut author, I'm like, yeah, I'll probably like that book. If Heather O'Neill, who I love very much, blurbs a book, I'm pretty sure I'm going to like it because we have the same taste. So all of that is, it does sway me a little bit.
Anakana, you're not a big believer in the power of blurbs. Why not?
Well, I think that there's something very anachronistic about them. I think the reader themselves is the best blurb. I think the booksellers are the best blurb. I mean, if any reader is out there right now who happens to have bought a book in the last 4 weeks, God bless you, because you're basically the only reason we can continue to write. So if you're on TikTok waving a book, I want to say I've never been on TikTok, but someday I might make it over there.
One day.
And you're waving a book. That's actually much more profound and useful than the back of the book. Before we came on the air, I took a look at my long shelf of Orange Penguin paperbacks.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see, okay, so what about the 60s, the 70s, the 80s? There isn't a single blurb on any of those books. Iris Murdoch didn't have a blurb from, whomever, Charles Dickens, or
right.
I mean, a bit of a different generation. But you see my point. It was always quotes from reviews because there was a critical culture. The space in which we get to think about reading is so contracted that, I've great sympathy for publishers who are out there trying to navigate this digital landscape. But no, I don't actually think they actually matter as much as writers are led to believe. I think Jen makes some really great points. I'm pretty sure that book editors who are going through 800 Jiffy bags, that could be helpful.
Right.
But the landscape in which book editors are trying to, choose 3 books per week to review, it is so difficult right now that I'd like to see more imaginative ideas. I'd like to see a return to some sort of, I'd like to see the start of a binge reading movement. And I'd like to see us gathering in public places to read. I'd like to hear us talking about the actual prose, rather than us, making up stuff on the back. Some of books that sometimes the reality is many readers who have to blurb books don't have the time to read the entire book. Fact. I'm not saying I've done that, because right now I am not in a position to blurb because I can't afford to feed my chickens.
Right. Well, you know what? Actually, I want to pick up on the point that you just raised, Anakana. Not the point about the chickens, but the point earlier about the idea of maybe we've lost some of the critical culture, because I think there's some kind of truth to that, Jen. The idea that, the quotes you used to be able to feature on the front of the book, even in the first edition of the book is like, we've sent this out to some critics. They have some thoughts on it. We put some of those thoughts right on the cover of the book. But now it sort of seems like the economy has kind of shifted to you send it to other authors before publication in order to get that sort of front of the cover blurb. Do you sense that it's a sort of a decline in critical culture as well that we've ended up here? Is that part of the reason?
Yeah, 100%. So my earlier books, my first books came out 15 years ago, and I had a book that was mediocre had 10 reviews in really high profile places. Yeah. These days, does the Globe and Mail, when they do review a book, how many books do they review actually fully a year? Maybe 12, maybe 10. It's really hard to say. But
they do the Globe 100 books at the end of the year, right? They sort of compile.
They do. Yeah. And they do those little tiny things that are a paragraph long. Yeah. But a full feature review is really, really tough to get. So when you've got say 250 novels, and these are just novels, 250 novels coming out in Canada a year, vying for those 10 full feature spots, you're not going to get the pull quote from the Globe and Mail or, whatever place you're getting it from. So in the absence of that, in the great vacuum of critical material that, book publishers can pull from, the only thing that fills that void are blurbs from other authors, and the more famous, the better. And I hate to say that because I love a good review. I love a great big article about a new book in the Globe and Mail. This is one of my favorite things to read, but we don't get those anymore. Not really.
You're in the position quite often of navigating authors through the process of actually trying to get a blurb. How does it work? And is it as transparent as use whatever connections you have, get them on the phone, get them to read this thing?
I never say that.
Okay. You would never say
say
that, but yes.
No, I am extremely ethical. What
Yes.
I say is, let's talk about blurbs. Give me your 5, like pie in the sky, most famous, if you could have anyone in the world, and then give me another 10 of people that you think are more likely. And I never say use your personal connections, although they often do. But
Right.
a lot of times with authors, it's not about the personal connection so much as who they wish to have blurbing the book. And then we talk about who might like the book. We talk about genre. We talk about maybe where the person is from. We talk about regions in the country, because sometimes you want broad representation. And all of those things go into it. And then we whittle it down. And I approach some of them if I know them somehow, or the author will approach some of them depending on what kind of relationship they have. I have literally sent emails to people who are so famous, I almost felt like throwing up when I sent the email, but that was fine.
Oh my God. Do you want to name names? It's okay if you don't. I get they're sensitive, but who are these famous people who are ghosting you? You know, that's what I'm curious about.
Well, they actually didn't ghost me. The really famous people actually email me back. Isn't that really nice?
That is really nice.
They often say no. But that's okay.
Anakana, is there a time that stands out for you when someone, you know, put a request into you to say, hey, can you read this? And then you had to sort of navigate the difficulty of being like, I don't know if I have the time. Any stories that stick out for you?
Oh, yes. There's an archive of stories. As you're discussing, I mean, you know, we're very partial to our colleagues. We're very partial. We've great feelings for other writers. It's so difficult to write a book. But I think the one that really stood out for me, and it often happens when you've been on the radio for some reason, the public will send you all kinds of interesting correspondence, generally that has nothing to do with with the book you're talking about.
Sure.
But one time, so during with the publication of my second novel, Martin John, in 2015, there was quite a lot of fuss about that book. And I should say it's a bit early in the morning, but it is about a sexual molester. And so I got a message in my personal email from somebody saying, I'm exactly like the character in your novel, Martin John.
Oh.
Will you blurb my self-published memoir?
Oh, no.
And, yes. And it was very distressing. And so that was the point at which I had to take my email off the internet. Because, you know, it was just, the approach. Okay, that's a very extreme approach.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've been approached like from territories like the UK. I'll often get approaches from the UK. And some of the publishers that approach me are wonderful publishers, and I'm a huge fan of the work that they do. But occasionally I'll get a lengthy letter from somebody via somebody who they saw in Germany at a book fair.
Sure.
And they'll be insisting that my name on this book is the thing that will bring this book to the attention it needs. And I have this moment where I think, it's very interesting. That publisher wouldn't even deign to publish my book. So how is it possible that they won't even consider my work, but that I'm the savior for this random book? The other thing that always strikes me is sometimes publishers will approach on behalf of writers. And so, which is what should happen, really. And so I'll look and I'll think, does this poor writer even know my work? Like, do they like my work? Have they read my books? Shouldn't they? So I'll go back and I'll say, well, but ultimately I had to do arms up at the end of the race. I'm just a lesser being than Jen. I just found it so stressful. No, we have to be honest about our limits, Elamin.
That's fair. That's fair. All right.
And I just found it was causing me just so much anxiety. And I was just really terrible at it.
Jen, we got about 30 seconds left, but I just want to just ask you about, if there's somebody who's an emerging writer, a young author who's really dreading the prospect of navigating the world of blurbs. Any advice to that person?
Yeah, I don't want them to dread it. Their publishers are to support them through it, first of all. And second of all, no author is like angry because you ask. They'll just say no, or they'll ghost you. But they're not going to be mad at you, and they're not going to like throw a drink in your face at a festival. It's going to be fine. No one's mad. It's all professional, and I don't want you to dread it. We all have to do it, and we all hate it. It's okay.
We all have to do it. We all hate it. That's the perfect conclusion of the conversation about blurbs. Jen, Anakana, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. And you know what? We'll see you back soon. Thank you.
Thanks.
I think we should move to bribes instead of blurbs.
I don't think we're going to take that advice, but I appreciate it, Anakana. Thank you so much. Sookfong Lee, Anakana Schofield are both authors based in British Columbia. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and you are listening to Commotion. Listen, up until probably last week, I'd never heard of Moving, this incredibly popular Korean TV series on Disney+. I started watching it on Sunday, I'm curious what this is about. I sat down to watch one episode, and then another, and suddenly 5 had passed. The season finale of Moving came out yesterday. I'm not caught up yet, but I am getting there. I'm on like episode 14 already in like 3 days. It's pretty wild. Moving is the most expensive Korean TV series ever made, and it's an adaptation of the popular webtoon of the same name by the writer and artist Kang. Webtoons are kind of like comics or graphic novels, specifically designed to be read on your phone. Lately, they've become a favorite source of inspiration for TV shows. But you know what? We're going to get to Moving and this moment in webtoon adaptations. Regina Kim is here. She writes about Korean pop culture. Regina, what's good? Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I'm so happy that you're here. Listen, no spoilers, but the last few episodes of Moving just came out yesterday. Did they live up to your expectations?
Oh, yes, they certainly did. I have to say that the 3-part finale was the best part of the show for me.
Wow.
Because I felt like I felt like everything came together in a really epic way. Because, I mean, to be honest, like when I first started watching the show, I wasn't that into like the first few episodes, but it felt like this is one of the shows that got progressively better. And so by the time the finale came around, I was totally satisfied.
That sounds like the best kind of concluding place to get, because like there is this kind of build to the show, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have to say the finale was super intense. There were definitely some gory scenes in there that I just had to look away from. And I'm honestly like someone who can handle a lot of gore. Like I thought Squid Game was okay, but this one, I had to look away a few times. So I do want to warn people out there who are, thinking about watching the show or who might be watching the show, do not watch it with young children because it's very violent. Yeah.
It actually is like quite shocking how often it swings from like the loveliest little tender moments to just the goriest scenes, quite often in the exact same episode. Listen, I would say a lot of people have been describing Moving as a superhero series. Can you just flesh that out a little bit? Because I don't think that's enough of a descriptor.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yes, like I would, describe it as a superhero series / spy thriller, but you're right. It's so much more than that. I mean, the series is basically about these, former South Korean secret agents who were recruited by the Korean government for their superpowers. And when they find out that their children have also inherited their powers, they do everything they can to protect their kids from these government organizations that are, trying to find and exploit them, right? So yes, there's a lot of action. There's lots of gore and violence. But there's also romance. And there are these coming of age stories that you see with the kids in the story. And, just like what you see in a lot of other K-dramas, there's also a lot of emotional storytelling throughout the show that's really centered on human relationships. And I think this last part in particular was what resonated with a lot of viewers around the world. Yeah. That, even though many of the characters in Moving have superpowers, they still feel very human and very relatable. And I think that's because like so much of the series revolves around these human relationships and the sacrifices that people have to make for their loved ones.
Well, I was going to say that like, watching Moving, the thing that really struck me after watching the first 5-6 episodes was the pacing of this thing. Like, this is a show that really takes its time. It really likes to sit in its characters, sort of like little trials and tribulations of their day, the things that are really making their life difficult. And so you really get to know the characters before the high-stakes stuff sort of comes in, before the villains get introduced. And that seems to be what a lot of people are talking about here, like the depth of the backstory for all the characters. Is that typical to like the webtoon format? Is that why we're seeing that in the show?
I would say that it's more typical to like it's more typical for a K-drama. Like that's like something that you see in a lot of other K-dramas as well.
Yeah.
Like I would say that, one of the main reasons why K-dramas have found such a huge global audience is that there's usually a very strong emphasis on character development. Like K-dramas oftentimes, take the time to show the characters' backstories so that the viewers can get to know these characters very well. And that, creates a strong emotional connection between the audience and the characters. And so if you talk to a lot of K-drama fans, like they'll tell you that, that's one of the reasons why they oftentimes like laugh and cry while watching a K-drama is because they're so emotionally invested in the characters.
Right.
And Kang, who is a creator of the webtoon and also wrote the script for the show, like he actually asked to extend the number of episodes from 16 to 20, just so that he could tell some of these characters' backstories in more detail, because he didn't really get to do a lot of that in the original webtoon.
The idea of like sitting in these characters' lives for 4 episodes longer, it really pays off because I am so invested emotionally in even the tiniest things that happen to these characters. And I actually cannot mentally handle the fact that you are ahead of me and you've already completed the show because I'm only on episode 14. I'm going to get there. But listen, it's the most expensive Korean series ever made. That's partly because of CGI and also partly because of the casting. Can you just talk about how stacked this cast is?
Yes. Oh my gosh. It is crazy. I mean, like, it's basically like the Korean equivalent of the Avengers franchise or the Ocean film series.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it's like. It's just absolutely insane. I mean, you have veteran actor Ryu Seung-young, who stars as Chang Joo-won. He's the parent that has regenerative powers. And Ryu Seung-young is probably like one of the greatest and most versatile Korean actors right now. Like, he is really amazing at playing both good characters and evil ones. Like, he starred in some of the highest grossing films in South Korea. Although I think most international viewers probably recognize him from the zombie K-drama Kingdom. Jo In-sung stars as Kim Joo-sik, and Kim Joo-sik is basically the hot dad who can fly.
The hot dad who can fly is an excellent descriptor of the character. That's entirely accurate. I fully support this description. Keep going. Continue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the first thing I thought of when I saw him, because I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, because this is the first time that Jo In-sung has been in a K-drama in like 7 years. And so to see him again, because he's such a famous actor who has a huge international following, to see him again in a K-drama was such a huge treat for me. You also have Han Hyo-ju, who plays his wife. She's a super talented and popular actress who's been in a ton of Korean films and TV shows. And I mean, most of the adults that you see in this show, like even the ones who have smaller roles, like most of them are really famous and highly respected actors in Korea. I mean, like, for example, the bus driver, right? AKA Beonge Man, which is, I guess, translated to Lightning Man. So Beonge Man is played by Cha Tae-hyun, who is another veteran actor that's been in a ton of iconic K-dramas and Korean films. For example, like My Sassy Girl, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. I mean, the list goes on.
So there's this is a moment where a lot of popular K-dramas are based on webtoons. We're talking about All of Us Are Dead, True Beauty, A Business Proposal, to name a few. Why is that trend happening, do you think?
Well, I would say that there are probably 2 main reasons for that. The first one is that over the past decade or so, we've seen the rise of streaming platforms in Korea, like both global ones like Netflix and Disney Plus, as well as local ones like TVing and Wave. And so the proliferation of these streaming platforms has created a need for a lot more content. But there are just simply not enough K-drama screenwriters out there in Korea to come up with original stories. And so webtoons have become a very easy way for them to source these stories. And then the other main reason is that so this is something that this K-drama screenwriter named Song Jae-jung, who is the main writer of this wonderful K-drama called Yumi Cells. Highly recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. But Song told me that as K-dramas become more popular globally,
Yeah.
you also see, you're also seeing these production costs increase. And so the stakes become a lot higher. And that means there's less room to fail, right? So then you saw these K-drama screenwriters, beginning to lean into safer, more conventional stories. But at the same time, these producers and TV execs, like they still wanted to find fresh and edgy content to keep their viewers entertained. And they could find that in webtoons.
Regina, I guess we should go back and set up. We talked about how so many popular K-dramas are based on webtoons. Maybe it would be helpful to give a primer on webtoons. What do people need to know about the format? Like, what are webtoons? How does it work?
Yeah, sure. So the term webtoon is a combination of the words web and cartoon. And
Right.
webtoons, like you said earlier, are basically, digital comics that are meant to be read on mobile devices such as smartphones. And in most cases, you scroll vertically to read them. Although there are a few where there are a few webtoons that follow the more traditional horizontal format. We first started seeing webtoons in Korea in the late 90s / early 2000s. But they really started to take off around 2003, 2004, which is when these two internet companies called Naver and Taum launched their own platforms for webtoons. And I should mention that Naver is like the Google of Korea, and Taum, which was also an internet giant. It was later acquired by Kakao, and Kakao today is basically the Meta of Korea. So it was really these two Korean tech giants, Naver and Taum / Kakao, that really popularized webtoons and built the webtoons industry into what it is today.
And I guess in this context, we're talking about Korean webtoons becoming TV shows, but this is not a trend that's limited specifically to just Korean content, right?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, for example, you have the Netflix smash hit Heartstopper, which is actually a screen adaptation of the British author Alice Oseman's webtoon and graphic novel. There's also Lore Olympus by Rachel Smythe, who is based in New Zealand. It's one of the most popular webtoons in the world and is currently being turned into an animated series. So it's definitely not just Korean content.
So back to moving, it's a part of a series of these connected webtoons by Gangpool, including timing, where characters can manipulate time. There's bridge, which involves characters from both moving and timing. Do you think we're headed towards a world where we see a Gangpool sort of multiverse on screen?
Yeah, I personally think so. If you noticed, at the very end of the final episode, there is a post-credit scene that kind of hints at a possible season 2. And there are tons of Korean language news articles out there that are speculating that perhaps, yes, there will be a season 2, although it has not been confirmed. Or at the very least, some of the other webtoons that are part of this multiverse, so Bridge, timing. There's also, again, they're all part of this connected universe that Gangpool has created. Some news reports are saying that maybe some of those webtoons will also be adapted into K-dramas or Korean films.
Regina, I'm going to leave the studio right now and run back to my house so I can finish watching the last 6 episodes because I can't live with the mystery. But in the meantime, thank you so much for coming on the show. I can't wait to watch the finale. I'm going to message you about it immediately after I'm done.
Okay, perfect.
All right,
Thanks so much.
Of course. Thanks for being on the show. Regina Kim is an entertainment writer focusing on Korean pop culture. And hey, you can stream all 20 episodes of Moving on Disney Plus and Hulu. And that is it for the show today. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. I will be here tomorrow. I hope that you will be too. See you then.